Virtually every week we hear from some shrill voice or other trying to make out that millennials are the first generation in history to be worse off than their parents. No voice has been louder or more persistent on this issue than that of a body pompously called the Resolution Foundation. Yesterday, think tank published a report claiming that the generational contract between young and old has broken down, with the middle-aged and elderly growing wealthy at young people's expense. In other words, the entire population of under 30s is effectively a repressed group that should be given special treatment. Virtually every week we hear from some shrill voice or other trying to make out that millennials are the first generation in history to be worse off than their parents in order to redress matters. The foundation proposes that all 25-year-olds be paid an inheritance of £10,000, which could be used as a down payment on a home, to acquire skills or to set up a business. It would be paid for surprise out of greater taxes on pensioners. I'm sorry, but I don't buy this argument. At the risk of sounding like one of Monty Python's 4 Yorkshiremen who boasted of being so poor they lived 126 to a room, the idea that today's young people are having a much harder time than their parents or grandparents is bunk. Related articles. Previous one. Next, the everyday 1990s objects millennials have never heard of. Share this article. Share. The truth is that, in many ways, they have never been better off. Hope it's not too late. A staggering 66% of millennials have. No doubt the young will howl that they can't afford to get on the housing ladder. And it's true, house prices have risen sharply in real terms over the past couple of generations. Moreover, graduates are now saddled with debts to pay their tuition fees of some £9,000 a year. While those of my generation lucky enough to go to university had our fees paid for us, no doubt the young will howl that they can't afford to get on the housing ladder. And it's true, house prices have risen sharply in real terms over the past couple of generations, but whose fault is that? The then university's minister who jacked up tuition fees from around £3,000 to £9,000 a year was none other than David Willetts, who is now executive chairman of, yes, you guessed, the Resolution Foundation, which is proposing this bountiful 5-figure payout. It is astonishing hypocrisy for him to complain that today's 25-year-olds are badly off and that the generational contract has broken down. Maybe he's feeling guilty. If it has, it is his fault more than anyone else's. Willetts is also the man who massively increased the number of students who can go to university, with the result that a huge number now drop out and standards have been diluted, with a 40% increase in the proportion of students getting a first. Willetts' argument is that 20-somethings are shortchanged and disenfranchised by the older generations, but in so many ways, young people are far better off now than when I was a 25-year-old in 1991. A year later, in 1992, the unemployment rate peaked at more than 10%. It is now 4.2%, the lowest since 1975. I'm sure there are plenty of graduates today stuck in jobs where they feel underpaid and underappreciated. But things were no different when I was 25, except that you were far less likely then to have a job at all. Graduates are now saddled with debts to pay their tuition fees of some £9,000 a year. As for graduate salaries, according to the website High Flyers, the top 100 companies pay their graduate trainees a median salary of £30,000, and 1/6 of them pay more than £40,000. Even a trainee at cut-price grocer Aldi can earn £42,000 a year. Hardly the breadline, is it? So many things, including food, clothes and travel, are much cheaper than they were when I was young. Never mind my parents' generation. Today, you can whiz around Europe by air for a few pounds on a flight probably booked via the ubiquitous smartphones that make communicating so much simpler than ever before. In fact, If you were to use one word to sum up modern life for under 30s today, it could be freedom. Freedom to travel, to socialize, to hook up with lovers using a smartphone app. Naturally, to shop online and to be entertained with 1,000 digital distractions. For my generation, sometimes called Generation X, and the baby boomers born just after the war, life was far more regimented. Whether you went to university or not, it's likely that, by the age of 25, you would have settled down and married, scraped together enough to buy your first marital home and shackled yourself to a mortgage. Of course, they will angrily argue that getting on the property ladder is beyond them because the market is overheated. Those were social and economic imperatives that do not seem to trouble today's 20-somethings. Of course, they will angrily argue that getting on the property ladder is beyond them because the market is overheated. Yet just look at the rock-bottom interest rates that are available to these so-called millennials. Prices certainly are far too high. 30 years ago, Britain was in the middle of a mad housing boom that was about to go pop, landing millions in negative equity and leading to many losing their homes. It was not a great time to be dipping your toe in the property market for the first time. Few of today's 25-year-olds have any idea of the pain that sky-high mortgage rates inflicted on home buyers. Frankly, I was fortunate I couldn't afford a home when I left university in 1989. I was saved from the house price crash that came about when interest rates hit 15%. And if that kind of rate would make modern youngsters take fright, remember that the generation before, in the 70s, had to cope with interest rates of 17%. I bought my first home, a 19th century 2-up-2-down outside Cambridge in 1993 for £63,000. If you think that sounds a steal, that wasn't how it seemed then. With interest rates still at 7.75%, yet rates have plummeted in the intervening years, so that you can now get a mortgage fixed at 1.5% for 2 years. At that level, the annual interest payments on that house today, even with its modern purchase price of around £250,000, would be far lower than I had to pay 3 decades ago. Admittedly, it's harder for today's 25-year-olds to save enough for a deposit because banks have mostly turned their backs on 95% and 100% mortgages. Presumably, that's what led David Willits to dream up this idea of a £10,000 bung to the young. The trouble is that if you hurl these inheritances at 25-year-olds, the Resolution Foundation suggests it would achieve little other than to inflate house prices even further. There is no doubt that people in their 50s, 60s and 70s have done well out of life and are better off than their parents were at their age, but that doesn't mean their children are worse off. Living standards have improved for all age groups, just as they have for every generation since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution 250 years ago. So please, let's not hear any more about young people being hard done by, especially from the ex-minister who chose to triple tuition fees and load up a generation with debt. Baron Willits was once dubbed Two Brains thanks to his apparently towering intellect, but after this naive and divisive proposal, perhaps he should be renamed No Brains.
Where the freaks at?